There's a movie that came out in the late 1990s called Idiocracy. It was made by Mike Judge, the guy who came up with Beavis and Butthead. That's a pretty funny critique. It's a live-action movie that offers the critique that society is getting dumber and will continue to get dumber into the future. You can agree or not agree with that critique if you want to. But the main character is played by Luke Wilson. And the gist is that Luke Wilson is the averagest human alive at the present time, but then when he gets taken forward into the future, everything has become so much stupider that now the averagest person alive in our age is the smartest person on Earth in hypothetical idiocracy future times. And there's this cute little scene at the beginning where they're trying to establish that Luke Wilson is very unmotivated and incredibly average. There's a recounting of an exchange where the colonel or whatever in his military unit is telling him to lead, follow, or get out of the way. And Luke Wilson's character is applauding himself because he's like, I did exactly one of the three options he gave me. I got out of the way. And then his colleagues are like, I think it's supposed to shame you into leading or following. I don't think get out of the way is one of the viable options. But we've all had that speech before where somebody in a position of authority is trying to rally us and get us to get off the fence and make a decision about doing things or not doing things, taking the things seriously that we're all a part of. And we run into a speech like that at the very end of the book of Joshua. Why am I bringing up the book of Joshua when we're talking about the book of Nehemiah in this season? Well, there's a reason. I'm going to make it all make sense here in just a minute. We're in Nehemiah chapter 8. We're looking at an event that occurred on September 27th, 444 BC, wherein all the people of Israel are gathering together to refamiliarize themselves with the law of God and to recommit themselves to it. And as we've been discussing for the last few days, this is reminiscent of a few other times that such a great assembly has spontaneously occurred in the history of this family we've been following through the Old Testament, the family of Abraham, the descendants of Abraham. So we looked at this one, or we're about to look at this one that happens in 444 BC. Then after that, the next day, we went and looked at one that happened in the 530s BC in Ezra chapter 3 under the leadership of a guy named Zerubbabel, a descendant of David. And then after that, we jumped back almost another 100 years into the late 600s BC to another giant assembly that occurred that was connected to a religious and cultural revival surrounding the teachings of the law, and that was under the reign of King Josiah, one of the last kings of the southern kingdom of Judah. That one happens in 2 Kings 22 and 23. And so what we see is that three of these great assemblies of the Old Testament have happened within a couple hundred years of each other. That's a very tight concentration comparatively. But if we want to go back to the next great covenant assembly of the descendants of Abraham, we got to go back from this one in the court of King Josiah around the year 600 and change, all the way back 600, maybe even 800 years to Joshua chapter 24, where a great cultural and military leader, a dude named Joshua, has completed his task. He has led the people into the promised land. He's defeated the wicked Canaanites who live there. The people in the process have been a little bit galvanized, but are also a little bit soft. Joshua is getting to the end of his life, so he calls all of the people together to remind them of where they've been as a people and to ask them a question about where they're going next. In a way, it's kind of the lead, follow, or get out of the way story, but get out of the way isn't really one of the options. It's sort of more of a challenge. Are you going to follow the God who has led us up to this point and who will lead us into the future, this God who keeps his promises? Or are you going to go your own way and follow pagan gods and do whatever you want to do? Understanding all of these great assemblies that punctuate the big plot points of the Old Testament is going to help us understand the home stretch of Nehemiah and the events of September 27th, 444 BC, all that much better. So here we are, Joshua 24:1. Old man Joshua's calling everybody together, and this is how it goes. Then Joshua assembled all the tribes of Israel at Shechem. He summoned the elders, leaders, judges, and officials of Israel, and they presented themselves before God. Joshua said to all the people, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says." And then he goes into several verses, 15 verses or so, 10 verses or so, describing the history of what God has done for them. So what he's listing out is all the ways that God has kept up his end of the bargain. Now remember, there's a covenant between the descendants of Abraham and God. He is reminding people of what that covenant was about, and he shows them through this description of God taking care of Abraham and taking care of Moses and Aaron and leading you all out of Egypt and hearing your cry and caring for you in the desert, even in the midst of all of your complaining and whining. God has been faithful. He has kept his promises throughout. So he's reminding them of the character of the God who has initiated this covenant and the character of the God who has written this law. And in verse 11, he pivots into very recent history, the stuff that has happened in the age of Joshua and the military victories that have occurred and them getting a place to live. This is verse 11. Then you, this is still Joshua speaking, but he's kind of quoting God. Then you crossed the Jordan and came to Jericho. The citizens of Jericho fought against you, as did also the Amorites, Perizzites, Canaanites, Hittites, Girgashites, Hivites, and Jebusites, but I gave them into your hands. I sent the hornet ahead of you, which drove them out before you. Also the 2 Amorite kings. You did not do it with your own sword and bow, so I gave you the land on which you did not toil, and cities you did not build, and you live in them and eat from vineyards and olive groves that you did not plant. Now, and this is where it gets into the lead, follower, get out of the way, the great big challenge for the whole assembly of Israel. Right here at this point, it's going to be tempting to have this just sound like Bible words and just sort of roll over you. But really hear this. This is the challenge. This is Joshua throwing down the gauntlet. It's easy to assume when we read the Bible, like, oh, well, the people who are on team good guy, of course they fear the Lord and they're faithful and all that. But it's not the case. There are real stakes here. This is not a foregone conclusion. And in fact, for the most part, the descendants of the people Joshua is talking to here don't get this right. So this matters. This is a big deal. Let's try to soak it in together. Now, fear the Lord and serve him with all faithfulness. Throw away the gods your forefathers worshipped beyond the river and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. But if serving the Lord seems undesirable to you, then choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve, whether the gods your forefathers served beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you are living. But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. Dang, that was pretty good. There's not a lot of ambiguity there. Are you going to be idolaters and serve fake gods made out of rocks that have never done anything for you and are impotent and that did not show up to serve their own people? Or are you going to serve the actual God who broke the laws of time and space and did all the stuff that I just listed out here, some of which I read to you and some of which I summarized for you? Which one is it going to be? Which one makes more sense? The way he frames it up, I mean, come on. There's not even really a debate. He's not trying to make it seem all fair and balanced and like, well, this really could go either way. In Joshua's mind, this is the biggest no-brainer ever. But he knows that the heart of his family, the descendants of Abraham, is fickle. He knows that they're always side-eyeing the local gods, the local pagan deities, and he knows that there's a chance that despite all the things that God has obviously done for them, and despite the fact that God has miraculously demonstrated the will of a divine being in giving them through miraculous circumstances victories that are not simply the result of moving characters around on the board and having your spearmen positioned correctly over here, and they threw a dice roll of 5, which defeats the defensive roll of 3, even with the marsh advantage that the defenders here. I mean, it's not like that. It's not just strategy. These are crazy victories, miraculous, no one else could get credit but God kind of victories. He's trying to summon all of that and be like, look at the big story of things. Put your finger on the pulse. See where you're at in the big picture here. Understand who you are in the story and where you are in the story and who you're dealing with in this story, and choose wisely. Ultimately, big time paraphrase here, I'm about to die and y'all are going to do whatever you're going to do. You're going to serve whoever you're going to serve. But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. Well, how do people respond? Verse 16. Then the people answered, far be it from us to forsake the Lord to serve other gods. It was the Lord our God himself who brought us and our fathers up out of Egypt from the land of slavery and performed those great signs before our eyes. He protected us on our entire journey and among all the nations through which we traveled. And the Lord drove out before us all the nations, including the Amorites who lived in the land. We too will serve the Lord because he is our God. I like this next part. Rather than just being like, okay, great, you gave the right answer. Good job. Joshua's going to be hard on them. It says, Joshua said to the people, you're not able to serve the Lord. He's a holy God. He's a jealous God. He'll not forgive your rebellion and your sins. If you forsake the Lord and serve foreign gods, he will turn and bring disaster on you and make an end of you after he has been good to you. That, it sounds mean, but that is in keeping with the terms of the conditional covenant God made with Moses that these people are renewing right here in this assembly. Verse 21, but the people said to Joshua, no, we will serve the Lord. Then Joshua said, you are witnesses against yourselves that you have chosen to serve the Lord. Yes, we are witnesses, they replied. I mean, it's 3 times, right, that they're being challenged to serve the Lord and follow him. And 3 times they're like, never, we never turn away. We will totally follow you. And it's totally reminiscent of Peter in his emphatic support of God. You know I love you, Lord. I'll feed your sheep. But also, it's reminiscent of Peter in his denials. Very potent stuff. Yes, we are witnesses, they replied. Now then, said Joshua, throw away the foreign gods that are among you and yield your hearts to the Lord, the God of Israel. And the people said to Joshua, we will serve the Lord our God and obey him. On that day, Joshua made a covenant for the people, and there at Shechem, he drew up for them decrees and laws, and Joshua recorded these things in the book of the law of God. Now that whole assembly and recommitment to the covenant and to God is happening on the back end of the Israelite people being freed from captivity from Egypt. The one that we're looking at right now in Nehemiah chapter 8 is happening on the back end after a resettlement has occurred of captivity in Babylon, under the Babylonians and a little bit under Persia. All of these great assemblies rhyme, and we're going to take more time after we're done looking at each of them to tie them all together and see how the assembly that we get here in the end of Nehemiah really puts a bow on the big grand story of the whole Old Testament. That's plenty for today. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour Podcast. Let's do this again soon.